Hannah Whitmore stepped off the narrow bus with a restless heart and a notebook clutched in her hand. 30 years old, freshly unmoored from a broken engagement back in Boston, she had convinced herself this trip to Bhutan was strictly professional. As an anthropologist and freelance journalist, her assignment was to document one of the world's few surviving traditions of fraternal polyandry, a practice where 2 or more brothers shared one wife. The arrangement fascinated her academically, but she could not deny the personal undertow of curiosity that had drawn her across oceans and mountains to this hidden valley. The village welcomed her with warmth that contrasted sharply against the thin alpine air. Children giggled as they ran barefoot across the packed earth, while elders in layered robes observed her with cautious pride. She bowed respectfully, conscious of her foreignness, yet she felt an almost magnetic pull toward the intimacy woven into daily life here. This was no museum of anthropology, it was a living world where relationships had different rules, different shades, and perhaps different moralities. Her hosts, 2 brothers named Dorj and Pema, introduced themselves with the calm assurance of men deeply rooted in their land. Dorj, the elder, had sharp, watchful eyes that seemed to weigh her every word. Pema, younger by only a few years, carried himself with a softer energy, his smile unguarded, his tone welcoming. Hannah noted their subtle contrast but did not linger on it. She was here to observe, not to indulge in comparisons. Still, when Dorj offered her his hand, and Pema quickly echoed the gesture, she felt the peculiar tension of being measured by 2 pairs of eyes at once. Her first days unfolded in rhythmic simplicity. She ate steaming bowls of buckwheat noodles at their family hearth, sat cross-legged during evening songs, and walked the terraced fields with the brothers as they explained how the land bound them together. In the evenings, she jotted meticulous notes in her journal, descriptions of rituals, sketches of household structures, reflections on the peculiar economy of sharing a wife. Yet beneath the academic discipline, she scribbled fragments of personal wonder. How does love survive without jealousy? How does loyalty stretch between 2 hearts? One evening, as dusk settled like smoke over the mountains, Hannah sat by the hearth with Dorj and Pema. A conversation began about her life in America. Dorj asked bluntly why she was not married. The question struck a nerve, though his tone was neutral. She deflected with humor, saying she had chosen books over rings. Pema, however, caught her eyes with a quiet understanding that unsettled her. For a fleeting second, she wondered if he sensed the truth, that she had fled here not only for research, but for refuge from disappointment. Gradually, she began to perceive the unspoken dynamic between the brothers. Dorj's authority was unquestioned, yet his words carried an edge of guarded control. Pema's laughter was freer, but it often faded quickly when Dorj entered the room. Hannah realized she was not just observing cultural tradition, she was stepping into a private world of power, loyalty, and suppressed longing. The first hint of personal entanglement came during a field walk. Pema guided her along a narrow ridge overlooking the valley, explaining how the brothers' shared wife ensured their family land remained undivided. Hannah listened with professional interest until a sudden slip on loose gravel forced her to grasp his arm. The touch lingered an instant longer than necessary, and though he said nothing, his silence carried an unspoken charge. That night, she replayed the moment in her mind, scolding herself for reading too much into it. But the seed was planted. As the week deepened, Hannah felt her role blurring. Villagers treated her not as a distant observer but as someone who might belong. Children tugged at her sleeves, women invited her to join their weaving circles, and the brothers seemed increasingly intent on her company. At times she wondered whether she was documenting their lives, or they were quietly testing the boundaries of hers. On her 7th evening in the village, an elder woman spoke to her through a translator. The woman said, almost matter-of-factly, "Here, a woman may belong to brothers. It is not strange. It is balance." Hannah smiled politely, but her heart pounded. She closed her notebook early that night, staring into the flickering light of a butter lamp. The anthropologist in her whispered, "This is cultural insight." The woman within her whispered something more dangerous, "This is possibility." When she finally lay down to sleep, Hannah could not ignore the gnawing thought that she was no longer standing at the edge of an unfamiliar custom. She was drifting toward its center. Hannah told herself she was still in control, that every moment she spent with Dorj and Pema could be rationalized as cultural immersion. Yet her heart betrayed her discipline. The brothers had ceased to be subjects of study, they had become men who occupied her thoughts in the silence of night. That it began with Dorj. One afternoon, he guided her to a prayer flag high on the ridge above the village. The wind snapped the fabric like a heartbeat, and he spoke with a gravity that caught her off guard. "You carry loneliness," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Hannah felt exposed, the air thinner, her defenses fragile. She admitted nothing, yet when his hand brushed hers, she did not retreat. The touch was brief, but in that instant she understood he had pierced through the layers she tried to preserve. Pema's attention was different, gentle, almost hidden. He sought her out in smaller ways, offering her the first serving of rice at dinner, lingering at the edge of her conversations, guiding her carefully along narrow trails. Unlike Dorj's intensity, Pema's presence soothed rather than challenged. But it was no less intoxicating. One evening, as they sat beneath a canopy of stars, he whispered that her laughter reminded him of mountain water, rare, clear, and fleeting. Hannah felt warmth bloom inside her, tinged with fear. She knew she was drifting into dangerous waters, yet she lacked the will to resist. Her journal entries grew conflicted. Some pages described kinship structures and agricultural cycles. Others blurred into confessions: "I am supposed to be observing, but I am being observed in return. 2 sets of eyes follow me. 2 sets of hands linger too close." She closed her notebook abruptly each time, ashamed of what was taking root inside her. One night, a storm rolled through the valley, rattling shutters and flooding paths with rain. The family gathered close to the hearth, but as the storm intensified, Dorj suggested Hannah remain in their home rather than walk to her guest house. The decision felt practical, yet charged with implication. As the others retired, she found herself sitting alone with him. His voice was low, deliberate. "You ask about our customs," he said. "But customs are not words in a book. They are lived. They are chosen." He leaned closer, and before she could summon resistance, his lips brushed hers, soft, searching, almost reverent. She should have pulled away, should have reminded him that she was here as an observer, not a participant. Instead, she allowed the kiss to linger, a betrayal she could neither justify nor deny. Her pulse thundered as he drew back, his gaze steady, as if daring her to name what had just passed between them, but the storm had another witness. When Hannah rose to leave, she caught sight of Pema in the doorway, his expression unreadable. A current of guilt surged through her, yet when their eyes met, it was not anger she saw. It was longing, sharpened by restraint. The following days unfolded with unbearable tension. Dorj treated her with subtle possessiveness, guiding her steps, asking pointed questions, ensuring her attention returned to him. Pema, by contrast, grew quieter but not distant, his silence carried the weight of unspoken desire. Hannah felt torn between fire and water, between authority and tenderness, between 2 men who represented opposite halves of a whole. She tried to withdraw, to bury herself in her research, but the effort faltered. Every gesture became charged, a hand brushing against hers while passing a bowl, a glance held too long during evening songs, the warmth of bodies seated too closely in the dim light. Desire was no longer a possibility. It was a reality pressing against her, demanding acknowledgement. The elder woman's words echoed in her memory: "Here, a woman may belong to brothers." It is not strange. It is balance. Hannah had dismissed it as cultural wisdom, but now it felt like a prophecy written into her skin. The idea terrified her. To love one man was a risk, to be entangled with 2 was unthinkable. And yet, unthinkable was precisely where she was headed. On the 10th night, she stood outside beneath a pale moon, unable to sleep. Pema approached quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dorj takes what he wants," he said. "But I wait." His words lodged deep within her, stirring emotions she could no longer disguise. She reached for his hand, and the decision sealed itself, not with logic, but with the inevitability of longing. As their fingers intertwined, Hannah realized she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She belonged no longer to her research, nor to her past life in Boston. She was now entangled in a secret that bound her to both brothers, a secret that could either shatter her or redefine her entirely, and in that fragile, breathless moment, she wondered not if she would fall, but which brother she would fall toward, or if she was destined to fall into both. Hannah awoke each morning with the sensation of carrying two lives inside her chest. By day she still played the role of researcher, notebook in hand, sketching diagrams of kinship ties and rituals. By night, however, she slipped into an existence neither professional nor detached. Dorj claimed her with certainty, as though possession were his right. Pema held her with tenderness, as though she were something fragile he longed to protect. Both brothers drew her in, and she could not untangle where desire ended and betrayal began. The secrecy was thin, almost transparent. In a village as small as theirs, glances lingered too long, footsteps outside her door came too often, and silence at mealtimes grew heavier. Children noticed her smiles, elders noticed her absence from gatherings. She told herself their whispers were harmless, but unease built like thunder on the horizon point. One evening, during a communal meal, the weight of exposure pressed down. An elder man recited a story of a woman who brought discord by favoring one brother over another. Though no names were spoken, Hannah felt the caution was meant for her. Dorj's jaw tightened, his hand gripping his cup. Pema avoided her gaze altogether. For the first time, she understood that what the tribe accepted in theory, one woman shared, was fragile in practice when emotions refused to obey tradition. Later that night, Dorj confronted her privately. His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed insecurity. "You cannot waver," he said. "If you are with us, you must be with both. Balance keeps peace." Hannah heard the command beneath his words, yet also the plea. He feared losing her, not only to the outside world but perhaps even to his own brother. When she turned to Pema the following day, he offered no words of possession, only a quiet confession. "I have waited all my life in his shadow. With you, I feel seen." His honesty cut deeper than Dorj's authority. She loved them both differently, one with fire, one with water, and the impossibility of choosing burned her from within. The crisis arrived not with a confrontation but with clarity. During a harvest celebration, the villagers danced in circles beneath strings of prayer flags. Hannah watched the rhythm of their movements, men, women, brothers, sisters, woven together in patterns that had endured for centuries. Yet she realized she was not woven in. She was a thread pulled across oceans, foreign to their fabric, too bright to blend, too fragile to hold. That night, lying awake between silence and longing, she knew she could not stay. To remain would mean surrendering not only her work but her identity. She had come seeking knowledge, perhaps healing, but what she had found was a mirror of her own contradictions. She could not reconcile Western ideals of fidelity with the tribe's expectation of shared love. More painfully, she could not reconcile her affection for Dorj with her tenderness for Pema. In trying to belong to both, she risked belonging nowhere. When she told the brothers of her decision to leave, the room stilled as though the air itself had collapsed. Dorj stood rigid, his jaw a mask of stone, yet his silence revealed what words could not: wounded pride. Pema bowed his head, whispering only, "Then you will carry us with you." Their responses were different, but each etched itself into her memory. On the morning of her departure, the valley was wrapped in mist. Villagers gathered quietly, neither condemning nor celebrating her choice. Dorj offered no farewell, though his eyes followed her to the path. Pema pressed a carved wooden token into her hand, a simple symbol of continuity. Hannah walked away with tears unspilled, her step steady though her heart fractured. Back in Boston months later, her notes lay in a neat stack on her desk, but she could not bring herself to publish them. The story of Bhutan's polyandrous tribe remained untold in academic circles, for the truth was not only about cultural survival but about the messiness of desire. She had crossed the line between observer and participant, between loyalty and infidelity, and in doing so had learned more about herself than she had ever intended. At times, when city lights blurred into twilight, she would close her eyes and hear the brothers' voices, Dorj's commanding, Pema's tender, blending into a harmony she could never separate. She wondered if love could exist without betrayal, or if the two were forever entwined. Perhaps the elder woman had been right, balance was the only way forward, but balance was not hers to keep. The memory of that hidden valley remained both a wound and a gift. She had betrayed expectations, her own most of all, yet she had also touched a truth that few dared to claim, that passion thrives where rules collapse, and that infidelity, for all its ruin, can also reveal the deepest parts of the human heart. And so Hannah lived on, caught between memory and consequence, knowing that in Bhutan she had not simply studied a custom. She had lived a story too raw to tell, except in the quiet chambers of her soul.